coming to the April 17th Instructional Committee meeting. Let's start with a quick attendance, and then we'll do the agenda. So, present we have Jess Campbell,
here,
Barb Higgins, myself, Brenda Hastings, and Sarah Robinson let us know that she would be absent this evening. Our agenda tonight is full of important and interesting, I find very interesting, information that's going to be presented to us by some pretty amazing staff members, and looking forward to hearing it. So, well, except for Chris, no. Kidding. Just kidding you.
Got it.
All right. So, Kim, do you want to start this, or?
I sure will. So we have two agenda items that we're going to cover tonight. One is an update on some of our data dives that we have done, and the other is a presentation from Concord High School and their MTSS-B, an update on how their MTSS-B programming is going. So just for background information, 3 times a year, an administrative team goes out to all of the 6 schools, and we go and hear data dives. And by what I mean by data dives is we get a kind of a portrait of the beginning of the year, how students are doing. We look at some benchmark data. Then we do a mid-year data dive where we look at to determine progress towards specific goals. And at that, going into the fall data dives, every school has already established specific goals and measurable goals. So we're sort of tracking that progress. So we've completed our beginning of the year, obviously, our mid-year data dives, and then we'll do data dives in the beginning of June, end of May. And this is kind of a traditional thing, and we do it so that we can track student progress and just have a query about how our students are doing and how it is that we're doing with closing the learning gaps with the students. So with us tonight, first up is the assessment coordinator, Chris Demers, who is very well versed at his position. And what he wants to do in particular is share one slice of data with you to give you a sense of how it is we use data. That's been a question that's come from the board in the past quite often. Like, how do you know students are improving? How do you know if we're closing the gap? It's somewhat of a technical presentation, but Chris will break down that information because there's so many different kind of measurements that we use. But just for background knowledge, iReady is a nationally normed assessment. It's given to students in this fourth grade for the first time this year, fifth grade for the first time last year, and then it's been used in 6th, 7th, and 8th for the last several years, and we bumped it to the high school for 9th grade. And the reason for that was so that we could have a larger span, a bigger story on how students are doing. And the other reason is to bookend that Runlet performance so that when students are going into the high school, they have information on how the students are doing in reading and math, and they can begin to schedule programming accordingly. And likewise, when the students are moving from 5th grade to 6th grade, they have data that's following them. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris Demers, and you can either ask questions during or after. That would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I am the opening act for the amazing team behind me, so I will keep it tight and informative. So, yes, the focus is on iReady, and actually Kim covered a couple of the initial slides, so we can actually save a little bit of time that way. We're going to sort of zoom in on what the story has been district-wide for those who are actually using it for the last 2 years. So historically, to repeat a little bit of what Kim just said, we've been using it for the last 2 years in 5th through 9th grade. 4th was added this year. It goes all the way back, you can see in the corner, to 2019-20 is when we first started using it at Runlet. And so it was just a Runlet thing for a while, and then we brought the others online. Actually, once I had stepped out to be a math coach for a little while, so some of this is new for me too. So here's the story, and I'm going to try to make some sense of this. There's a lot of numbers here, a lot of colors, but I'll try to help you sort of make sense of this. This is the 2022-23 story for reading. All 5th through 9th graders who participated, they take it 3 times a year, and basically they can fall into one of 5 categories. Generally, there's red, yellow, and green. And you can imagine that the red is not necessarily where you want to be. Those are the students who are falling below grade level. The shaded red are those who are falling significantly below grade level. Red, just plain red, is a little bit higher than that. Yellow is 1 grade level below expected. And then those who fall in the green are either early on grade level or at about mid or even above grade level. So that's the range, and that top set of graphs is basically the fall picture. You can see how many students fell into each category. Again, this is 5 through 9, and what we try to pay attention to is how does that story change over the course of the year. So the good bit of news is, as you can see, the red shrinks from fall to winter. Goes from 43% to 35%. And meanwhile, the green expands from 32 to 42, so that's good news. The yellow tends to sort of stay the same, those kids falling 1 grade level below. The assumption by looking at this is that some kids from the red have made their way to the yellow, and some from the yellow have made their way to the green from fall to winter. Not magically by just taking the test, but from the hard work that teachers and students are doing. And then you can see in the spring of last year, things started to reverse a tiny bit. The green got a little bit smaller and the red got a little bit bigger. That was the reading story for last year, for 5 through 9. And then conversely, somewhat similarly but different at the same time as well, we have the math story. And as you can see, if you have the graphs from the reading slide before this, we started with way fewer kids who were on grade level. We started with 32% in reading, and in math it was only 16% in grades 5 through 9. So same kids now taking the math test. This is consistent with what we see in math on the state assessment. This is consistent with what iReady sees in terms of performance across the boards nationwide. Kids tend to do worse on math. The good bit of news, though, as you compare where they started, we went from 16% in the green, and then that nearly doubled by the time they came around and took the diagnostic assessment again in the winter, and then continued to increase to 33% in the spring. And then, as you can see, on the other end of the scale, almost half of the kids fell way below grade level in the fall in math. And then that got cut over the course of the year. And then that yellow band still sort of staying about the same, getting a little bit smaller by the spring. So while math sort of started off further behind than reading, it kind of caught up and actually did a little bit better in terms of the percentage of kids who fell way below grade level. Before I go on, I'm just going to pause. Anybody have any questions on what I've showed so far? There's a lot there.
Can I just interject
Yeah,
for
please.
a second? So what the administrators can do is take the same data and look at it from their own buildings. So remember, this is a district-wide profile. Mm-hmm. So we have profiles on every building. Mm-hmm. And when you hover over that 38%, you can actually see the students' names. And then you try to build in some interventions for those students. So I want, from this picture, I don't want you to just see the numbers. I want you to understand that this is how we target our interventions, like in particular when the math coaches are working with them, the teachers are working with them. They name those students and build in interventions and, just overall instructional strategies to help them move from that 16% to the 33%. So there's students' stories behind all these numbers.
Yeah.
Good point.
Sorry, go ahead, Jess.
This is for next year. This would be fantastic to have before budget season. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's possible or even the most up-to-date numbers. Like this helps, at least for me, get a view of needs. This would be great. So I'll make a note, but this would be awesome to have before budget.
So the next couple of slides will actually give you a sense of what's possible by that time, because here's this year's story for reading.
Yeah.
And so we do the winter assessment in January, which seems like that would be early enough to at least build this picture.
Mm-hmm. And I'll try to remember too, but this would be really helpful.
Chris, I've got 2 questions. One is, what is our goal for green? Do we have a goal?
I think that what schools have done is, based on where they're starting, is they'll devise their own goal.
Okay, so
We have not.
It's building specific.
Yeah, it would be more building specific.
Okay.
We
The
don't-
district doesn't have a goal.
No, we don't. I mean, we could, certainly. And we're going to meet again this summer, like administrators and others did. I suspect we will anyway, to sort of dig into this information. And typically what comes out of that event are school-based goals connected to this, connected to state assessments, connected to any other assessments that they're doing.
Does the state have any guidelines for where we should have students be as well as far as proficiency goes?
On iReady in particular?
No, just in reading and math.
I mean, generally, the state assessments are telling a similar story to what we're seeing. There's, everything tanked after or during and after COVID.
Right.
So they're just sort of,
Reevaluating what they
exactly
might be.
watching how everyone's sort of clawing their way back.
Okay. And then my last question
Sure.
was, on the reading, do you have any anecdotal explanation as to why the reading went down?
Oh, from winter to spring?
Yeah.
I don't, no, and that, it begs to, to see in the coming weeks whether we're going to see that same trend. I don't know. It's interesting because, and actually we kind of saw it a little bit, the math story was different, starting lower and then eventually ending up a little bit higher. No, I don't. I will tell you one bit of anecdotal data that I've been working with a class, actually 3 classes over at Abbott Downing, and that particular teacher, a reading teacher who teaches all 3 levels, has been doing a fantastic job, like engaging the students in this information. And so we connected with them ahead of them taking their winter assessment. I mean, aside from all the work that they're doing in between, but we really wanted them to sort of own their results because the numbers behind these are it's this scaled score that doesn't mean anything to kids. I got a 236, I got a 242. They don't know what those numbers mean. I don't know what those numbers mean. But we want them to sort of pay attention to where they're at, what their targeted growth score is. I'll get into that in a moment. And the kids set goals for themselves. And then she said when they sat down and took that winter assessment, they were much more focused on doing it. Again, it's not just their mindset that made the difference. They've been doing a lot of good
The
work
reason
there
for
too.
doing it, right.
But absolutely. And what we saw from that cohort of kids at that school for that grade level far exceeded what we saw from anybody else. And it was just that added little boost came from their investment piece. So that there is the potential to engage kids. And iReady, to their credit, is built on that sort of that notion of they've got all sorts of structures and protocols and procedures in place to engage kids in their results and to set goals for themselves and then to be active in sort of trying to achieve those goals.
I'm sorry, one more
Yeah,
question.
no, absolutely.
And I'm sorry, this is not an appropriate question. I've loved iReady as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective on the board, I've enjoyed it. I would love candid feedback. Do you know if our teachers are liking it, or are they kind of?
I
It's
think-
okay to say no, they hate it.
No,
I'm
I don't.
curious. It's
I mean,
important.
like anything, I think it's mixed.
Okay.
I will say I've been surprised by 4th grade picking it up this year.
Yeah.
Largely, there was a fair amount of enthusiasm. I'm not knocking 4th grade, but I sat with them when they were introduced to it in the summer, and for the most part, there was a lot of positive energy around it. There's more to it than just the 3 tests, as
Of
you
course,
may
and
know.
that's just
that-
the time is so precious for them. Like,
Right.
I just want to make sure whatever we're doing, yeah.
Right.
The other lenses, I love it. and
Yeah. No, it's a fair question, and I think it's something that, we need to pay attention to for sure, because you're right, time is precious, and the time spent by students engaging in the learning path that they're doing on a regular basis. Some are all in and doing it on a regular basis. I think it's sort of, we called it a soft opening this year, especially for 4th grade, because this is new for them. And we can pay attention to like how much time kids are spending on their learning path, how much more time they need to, how much less time, and they've got a recommendation from the company as to how much time is necessary. Some are right on target with that. Some are really digging in, doing more, and some are doing less.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so the reading story for this year, this is how it's shaping up. It's similar-ish to last year, actually a little bit behind, I think, if you compare the percent in green to what we saw starting last year. Again, keep in mind, this is picking up 4th grade this year, so we're testing more kids. And then the math story, somewhat encouragingly, started stronger than we did last year. If you remember, it was 16% scoring in green, which doesn't sound terribly impressive. 24 doesn't sound great either, but it's better than 16. Yeah, so that's encouraging for sure. And you can see that same trend. They're cutting the red and they're increasing the green. So we're encouraged by that. All right, so I'm going to blow through a couple of things to sort of get you to the thing I was mentioning before about growth. So 2 fictitious students here. The big piece of the program that focuses on engaging students with this is around growth. And what they can do is, depending on how a student scores, in this case, fictitious Alex and Bianca, whatever they score, the system sort of generates for them automatically a typical growth score that is expected of that student when they take the test again in the spring, a year later, or a school year later. And then there's a stretch growth on top of that. So this is important, as you'll see in a couple of slides, that we keep in mind that not every student has the same growth scores. It is dependent on where they're starting. Generally, the lower they're starting, their growth scores are going to be larger. The idea is that we want them to close the gap. And then students like Bianca, who are already scoring higher, tend to have smaller growth scores because they're getting closer to the ceiling, and so there's less wiggle room to sort of show growth. And so what we've been engaging students with, like that class I mentioned earlier, is to sort of help them to understand what their story is. And I'll show you an example story in a moment. So a graph similar to this, which doesn't have anything on it yet, but just to orient you to this, we can sort of pay attention to, once the students test in the fall and then again in the winter, how many of those kids are making progress toward their typical growth score. Mm-hmm. And so those points along the bottom represent like how much progress they've made. So these kids over here, you don't see any bars yet because I just wanted you to get oriented to the graph. These kids are sort of, they're just beginning. They haven't made a lot of progress toward their end of year goal. Conversely, on the other side, you've got kids who actually mid-year have already hit or exceeded their end of year goal. And so anybody who lives on this end of the graph, that would be that person. Anyone who lives sort of here in the middle is basically about halfway toward hitting their end of year goal. And so we actually ask the students, what would you expect your story to look like, and try to engage them in what that would be. And because we're running out of time, I'll spare you that exercise. But this is the story. And it's pretty typical across both reading and math. We tend to have graphs that look like this. Nearly half of the students in the winter hitting their end of year goal already. That was last year's story, and then this is this year's story. And then slightly fewer kids who are sort of still sort of stuck, not perhaps making a lot of progress, and relatively few students sort of in the middle. I wish I could explain why the graphs have this shape, but it is the story that we see across the boards, school by school, grade by grade, generally. That one class that I mentioned earlier, their graph on this side was a little bit higher and a little bit lower on that side. That was a really encouraging story. A lot of kids were hitting their mark already. So that's what we were seeing in reading. And the math story tends to be pretty similar. And I don't honestly know why they all look that way. You can see the spread is a little bit, there's more people in the middle in terms of math, and fewer kids hitting their end of year goal, so it doesn't exactly resemble reading. But this is what we're trying to pay attention to, because we want kids to demonstrate growth. And it's all the hard work that's happening in between that makes the difference. And then in terms of stretch growth, because we're trying to pay attention to that too, now we're looking at how many kids are actually hitting that stretch growth, that above and beyond. And as you can see in reading and in math, we actually do have some students who by mid-year are already hitting that above and beyond. These kids are cranking it. And so we want to try to keep engaging students in this, and then obviously doing the hard work in between to help them reach those goals. And I'll just close with, and I know I'm moving very fast, but I want to be respectful of time. I'll close with some research that iReady shared with us recently that I think really speaks to the importance of this stretch growth or stretch goal and paying attention to that. This is data that they've collected nationally of students in grades 2 and 3. So this is a 2-year story. And they're looking at all of the students. If you remember those graphs that I started with, all those kids that were in the red, specifically students who were multiple grade levels behind. So we start with those kids in the fall. And then for those students who were all multiple grade levels, 2 or more grade levels behind, for those students who hit their stretch growth, by year's end, the picture looked like this. That instead of 100% of those kids being 2 or more grade levels behind, we now have 53% of the kids who are at grade level and another 43% who are just 1 grade level below. And that's after only 1 school year. And then with those students then hitting their stretch growth again the following year, 100% turns into now 89% on grade level and 9% just 1 grade level below. And what was 100% multiple grade levels below is now only 2%. So that's why we want to pay attention to this. Obviously, it's what has to happen to make that kind of growth is, the $1 million question. But we want to get better at paying attention to these numbers, trying to use this tool to sort of leverage that kind of improvement.
Have they studied what programs the schools used
To make that happen?
to make this happen?
I suspect they have. I don't know. They're tapped into hundreds, if not thousands, of districts, and I don't know that there's commonality in terms of those that are doing it. I suspect they have, but I don't know what the answer to
It'd
that
be
is.
interesting to find that out,
Yeah.
though.
I can
Instead
ask.
of always trying to reinvent the wheel as to
Exactly.
which product we're
Right,
going to
right.
use.
They may tell you that they're using their own
Their
product.
own. We use their own as well. Right?
We
Did we purchase that?
Oh, for next year.
Oh, we haven't had it the last 2
No.
years?
No.
we have not.
So I put down on the instructional committee that I would, or into the notes, I guess, from Kathleen last week, that we have landed finally after a major review of lots and lots and lots and lots of programs, and the committee was very large, who was looking at the programs. We've landed on iReady Classroom Math to purchase.
Okay. For which grades? Is that K?
It will be K through 6. So there'll be 1 grade level at Runlet Middle School. And the reason for that is because 7, 8, and 9, if you remember, are going to be using Open Up resources in the same algebra instructional program. And we didn't want 6th grade to be left out of this story and have the kids just having a consistent program going into their first year at Runlet. And so in one case, there was a program that was only K through 5, and that was just off the books for us because I wanted 6th grade to really have that alignment.
It could be the invisible grade.
Right, and Barb, it would be like they'd have 1 curriculum program, and then 6th grade would be a standalone having a different program, and then 7th grade would go into algebra. So continuity is what we've been looking at. And
Well,
that,
when you mix all of the different elementary schools together, they were all coming from the same place and doing the same thing. So it makes sense.
so you have that announcement a little bit early. Probably some of the staff members are like, oh, they have the announcement a little bit early, but that's okay.
Spoiler.
Spoiler.
Brenda, I'll ask that question. My suspicion is they're going to say, buy our stuff, but
Right.
perhaps not.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's all I have.
Well, thank you. This is
Yeah,
really
sorry, that was
helpful, and
fast,
I'll
but-
echo
No, that's
Jess's
awesome. Thank you.
comments that this would be great information to have before
Okay.
budget season next year.
I'm on it. Okay.
This meeting.
Yes, and that is, I think a large part of that is because this meeting did get postponed. Because of budget. Because of budget, right. So. Thank you, Chris, that's great
We
work.
could all go to your house and hang out and talk about iReady numbers.
Yeah,
That would be really
yeah, we can do that.
exciting. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And next, we have the MTSS team from Concord High School coming up to present this new exciting program. Not really a program, but
We'll just put it between.
No? Okay, this is my favorite committee, just so you all know.
because this is where the good stuff happens.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it.
So thank you for having us here tonight. So this is a CHS MTSS Universal team. Before I get started, I'm just going to have them go around the table, introduce themselves. I know Kim, John, and Brenda we work with on a regular basis. Barb probably knows most of us. A few new faces, and Jess, I know there's quite a few new faces for you.
Margie Braska, school psychologist at Concord High School.
Samantha Radisick, school counselor at Concord High School.
I'm Lauren Orland. I'm a school counselor at Concord High School.
Hi.
Jim Cork, I'm one of the assistant principals at Concord High School.
Graham Crowther, also an assistant principal at Concord High.
Hello. I don't remember anybody. I will write it down now. Marjorie, and then I stop there. I have no executive memory.
It's all right. We didn't expect you to remember everybody's names. We are missing a teacher, Liz O'Neill, who's an integral part of our team as well. She couldn't be with us tonight, but I just want to, the reason I have everybody introducing themselves is this is a interdisciplinary team. It's got counselors, teachers, administrators, and we incorporate student voice into it through multiple means, whether it's in focus groups or surveys, but we really are trying to look at, when we say universal, the best approaches for all students and staff at Concord High School. So MTSS is essentially multi-tiered systems of supports. Oh, yep. Let me do this. This will help.
I may need to interject quickly, Tim, because this year part of our, and we'll talk about steps we've taken, was making sure we included a community member on our MTSS team, and Brenda Hastings has donated
Brenda,
her
I'm
time
sorry.
to join us
That's
and
okay.
be part of our Tier 1 team.
I will say, when we were interviewing for the principal, this came up a few times, and I had no idea what it was before then. People are so impressed with our engagement with this as a district. I just want to thank you, because it just made me so proud. Like, you guys are doing a great job, and we're known for our engagement with this, so thank you for that.
And I will say, while he's trying to do that, I have been overwhelmed with
Yeah.
what they take on in addition to their regular, job descriptions.
Yeah.
They're very dedicated, and we're very fortunate to have them.
We are. Thank you so much, all of you.
We're seeing it might let me.
You just want more praise.
Well, this
You guys
monitor
are
is
amazing.
excellent judging character. Here we go. All right, so. From the beginning.
Here you go.
So essentially, MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems for Student Wellness and Support. What we do at Concord High School is we have an integrated service framework. So we're looking at the holistic child. We're looking at services, supports, and models we have in place to support the students and staff at our school. We're constantly reviewing this using data, which Chris went over, and that was well played to have him go over some of the data we use for academic purposes, but office discipline referrals, counselor referrals, student discipline, outcomes, behaviors that we see, times of the days of the week, attendance, tardies, etc. So we're using a variety of different data points to identify areas of needs, and we use the data to inform us on where we have to do better with our models, where we have to seek out new models to meet the students' needs. And the idea is, if we have these supports there, our students will be academically, social-emotionally, and mentally well prepared for post-high school. And be more successful in their 4 years at Concord High School, for that matter, have a better understanding who they are as an individual. This aligns very much so with the public health approach, where it's the holistic individual looking at their needs, whether it be around LADAC, mental health, counseling services, family services, or basic nutritional needs or intervention for the family there. Anybody who's been around education for a while may have heard terms such as PBIS or response to intervention, the RTI. This is the 2.0 version of that, and it digs a little bit deeper and has a higher fidelity to using data to, make the informed decisions as to what a school needs.
Tim, could I just stop for a second? Just to let the board know that Fern Seiden, our Director of Wellness and Health, Student Staff Wellness and Health, has an MTSS-B team at every building throughout. It's the high school's further along than any other team, but I just wanted to, although you're seeing Concord High, it's a district-wide initiative. You guys are just leading the force.
And both Margie and Jim serve on the district, am I correct?
I'm not.
And you're not on the district? Okay. Yeah, I may have just nominated you. But Jim is serving on the district MTSS-B team as well. And this slide, just to give you a grand overview, it's hard to really paint the picture and show the complexity of what the MTSS team does at each tier. So the best way to do it is to use this graphic and show the various services that you would see in an educational setting, or programs that you may have encountered in the past or have heard of. And below those programs, such as RTI, PVIS, add restorative justice in there. Below it, you see how there's these different community partners listed at the bottom. Each of these support systems we have is addressing or attempting to address needs that may fall or align with those community partners, in addition to bringing in our community partners to work with us to better support our students and staff as we meet the diverse needs of the students sitting in our classroom today.
So one of the big pieces of the MTSS framework, we do a lot of talk about fidelity, right? A fidelity of implementation, to make sure that what we said we were going to do, we're actually delivering and then measuring the outcomes accordingly. And one of the big cautionary sort of tales of MTSS framework is, before you add something new, make sure that you are keeping track of what you already have and maximize the effect. So when we started really MTSS about 6 years ago at the high school, 7 years ago, something like that, really what we needed to do for about a year is to take a look at all the teams and all the different silos that we had within the building, and then look at alignment. Because what we didn't want to do is just add another team to then be doing MTSS, and I'm putting that in air quotes here, because we knew that people were doing excellent work. We needed to align it, and just like that umbrella on the previous slide showed. So one of the big pieces really here is we need to clearly identify what we are going to stop doing in order to add a new practice or a new approach. The other piece is to clearly define the system for fidelity of implementation. And you will hear me say this over and over again. The fidelity of implementation is really critical within the system, because we cannot measure outcomes if we don't know if we implemented what we said we were going to implement. And that's really one of the key components, is fidelity, but also not overwhelming the system that you already have, and really aligning and almost putting the pieces together. If we can address a need through one team, why have a separate team? Because time is precious. And so obviously that's a big component of that.
That slide should be, I think, part of everything we do. No matter what it is, we should be looking at that slide and saying, where are we on that scale?
I'm going to use it at work with my team. So.
I'm going to use it for my house. So.
Well, that's great. That's wonderful. Really, the structure of MTSS, we as a team have actually gone through implementation training through Institute of Disabilities to really learn about how do you align, integrate, implement with fidelity, measure outcomes, and define goals. And what you really see here is the graphic of really how the sort of staircase, right, goes up and then down, and it's a continuous loop. What we want to start off with, regardless of where you start off with, I'm going to start at the district leadership level. We want to make sure that we are aligning that with our universal targeted teams, like Tier 2 within the MTSS framework, and tertiary teams. And then we want to look at the impact on faculty, staff, and obviously ultimately youth and families. But then also, I'm sort of going back up the staircase. If we identify a need or a need for preventative strategies at the universal level for youth and or families, we need to then look at how is that integrated with faculty, staff, what kind of training people need, what kind of understanding is needed. Then we're looking obviously at the universal team, how are we going to make it happen? And we go up the ladder to district leadership teams to look for support, funds, and anything else that goes along with it. So really it is a system within multiple systems that lets us align and integrate all the pieces to support our work. This is just another graphic of all the pieces, if you will, key features of when we're looking at implementing MTSS. As you can see, there is leadership team implementation and coordination. So we meet at the high school on a biweekly basis. At this point, we used to meet weekly. However, given where we are in the process, we felt that every 2 weeks it was a much better and doable structure for us. We are continuing to monitor progress, so as things come up, and actually Jim will talk a little bit about data that we wanted to present of sort of how that informs our work. Universal comprehensive screening, so starting last year, the district has started doing SABRs. So that's one of the pieces. Prior to SABRs, we actually did screening at middle school, high school transition only, to really identify students that needed some additional support during the transition, knowing that ninth grade is really critical to success throughout high school. We're always looking at cultural and contextual relevance, and that's because we have diverse learners, we have diverse needs, and we want to ensure that. Obviously, data-based decision-making, we live through data, if you will, and monitoring that. And then I mentioned already implementation fidelity, really looking at, are we delivering what we say, and are we measuring the outcomes accordingly? And one of the other pieces of MTSS-B is that really we're looking for evidence-based interventions. What you will find also in literature is that at the high school level, there is actually not a lot of evidence-based interventions. And that's simply because when in the sort of old days of, RTI and PBIS, a lot of focus was on elementary school and then starting to move up to middle school. We are, and I will say this, as a high school, are one of the few high schools that are doing this well, and we've done it sort of adapting different pieces that are available to us. But when we're looking at interventions, a lot of interventions probably end at around age 14, and they're not evidence-based. So the language of evidence-based is not as available to us at the high school level, not because we don't want it, but because there is just lack of it. It doesn't exist. What I will say is the new and upcoming research really is focusing on high schools, and that's really to do more of drop-out prevention and really mental wellness and mental health throughout the schools and youth has been identified as a crisis. So there's definitely more and more coming up. I'm going to go to the next slide because I will keep talking about this. I'm sorry. What you will see in MTSS really, it's the triangle, and as Tim mentioned, it's based on a public health model. So what we do know is that regardless of what you do, about 80% of your population will respond to it and do great with it. And when I say public health model, right, if we are thinking about, let's say, diabetes, prevention measures for diabetes, for everybody, healthy diet, exercise helps. About 80% of the population will respond well to that and will do exactly what is needed. It's the same thing with youth and behaviors and their wellness. We also know that at Tier 2, that's the triangle, in the triangle that's yellow, between 7 to 15% will need something different, something extra. So we call those Tier 2 interventions. Those are typically group interventions where we are focusing on brief group interventions that are building skills in whatever identified area the youth might need support. And then the tip of the triangle is really up to 5%, 1 to 5%. And those are really we're looking at more intense, more targeted and individualized interventions for youth that are presenting with that. Here is our triangle, if you will, with not all of it is up there, but some of our supports are Tier 1, 2, 3 that we have identified. And I'm going to turn it over to Lauren and Sam to talk about Tier 1 specifically.
Yeah, so some of the Tier 1 things, because we are the Tier 1 universal team, we're looking at a couple of areas that we're focusing on, and that's for all the students in the school. So one of those things is our Crimson culture, which is those soft skills, the things that we want our kids to come out of high school mastering so that they are productive, contributing citizens and wherever they go. So we've identified collaboration, communication, creativity, and self-direction are part of our Crimson culture. And over last year, the Crimson culture subcommittee piloted assessing students and having conversations with students in the classroom on those skills. And this year, all classes are doing it. And so it's a conversation-based model with the students, and it involves feedback from the teacher, conversation, and self-reflection on how they're doing on those things. Another big focus we've had as a team this year is looking at our advisory program, or not program, just our advisory system, and figuring out how we can make it better for our students and staff. Our goal was to create a common experience and understanding for all the students and staff that participate in advisory. So it's one of those things, like Margie said, we already have it, and we want to try and do it well rather than throw something else in there. So we're also hoping that advisory all students and staff that are involved in advisory can make meaningful connections with one another, and how can we support them in doing that without throwing too much on. So we've made a guideline for them of structure of how you can go through, your week. So Mondays are an SEL check-in. Tuesday is games or activities together as a group. Wednesday, we want them to talk about Crimson culture and maybe do some lessons or discussions around those 4 components. And then Thursday, we're asking for them to do an academic check-in. They have about 12 to 15 students max in that group, so we're asking them to check in on their academics and sign them up for their WIN block on Friday, where they get extra support. So we're also looking at how we can group those advisories better. So we're talking about next year with our 9th graders, how can we pair them with the right grouping of kids and teachers. So we're trying to do this by interest. So we're looking at the teacher advisory interests and things that they like to do and talk about and participate in, and seeing if we can align some students with that, so that they can all have something in common on day 1. So those are just some things we're just really trying to figure out how to make a better experience for all the staff and students in advisory.
We've seen a lot of growth in our restorative practices at Concord High. We have a core group of 15 staff that comprise our leadership team. We're trained in community building and curriculum in the classroom, which are Tier 1 universal practices, and then also in problem solving and conflict resolution, which is a Tier 2 practice. The leadership team has trained 12 students, who in turn have trained another 63, and students have begun leading community building circles in advisories. The leadership team has also trained 87 faculty in community building and 30 in curriculum in the classroom. And the trained teachers have begun to use community building practices in their classrooms with success, and also have been able to enrich their curriculum delivery with the skills from the curriculum in the classroom. Also, restorative practices are being used, they're being implemented at the commons level to repair relationships among students when there's conflict. And also, restorative conversations are held when students re-enter the building after having experienced exclusionary discipline. So our team is really excited and looking forward to continuing to bring our capacity farther.
Could I just ask you a favor, for those who don't know, who might be listening from the public, for those who don't know what restorative practices is, do you have a definition for persons?
Yeah, restorative practices, excuse me, it's a framework for having really building community and building equity in the school, and making sure that all voices are heard, and that when there is harm, that there is a way of restoring the relationships among people. Add to that.
Did a great job. I would add one thing. Instead of looking at it as infractions against rules and a penalty, we look at it as what harm was caused, how do we fix the harm, and what can be learned in this situation.
I just wanted to touch base on a couple of other universal supports. We all know we have a very rich athletic community here at Concord High School. We also have expanded up to 73 co-curricular student-led clubs, which are, I would say the majority have been brought to us by students based upon their interests that they find a faculty advisor. And that is We had 5 new clubs this year, and we expect to keep empowering the students to come forward with more opportunities, to keep them engaged and keep them a part of that community. And then things we're doing to help keep the staff engaged throughout the year. A grassroots effort was put together to start Fun Fridays, themed-based Fridays based upon staff interests. So they throw out some suggestions. We put a poll out each week. We have up to 80 respondents, and the following Friday, the teachers are participating in a theme Friday. Starts getting that community throughout the building, cross-curricular departments, gets teachers out of their departmental silos, brings a little fun and excitement into the building, and now the students are asking to be a part of that, which is the ultimate goal, is for everybody to kind of be intertwined in that together.
So right here is going to go off of something that Dr. Barasco was speaking about earlier around our implementation. And I would absolutely agree with her when she says at the high school level that there's not as much that we've seen. And I may be a little biased in saying this, but I would say that we, for high schools in New Hampshire, I think we are very much ahead of the game. And just, perfect example is we were at some trainings within the last month with lots of other high schools around the state, and just how much further ahead we are with our implementation and what we have to offer our students and staff is impressive. And it goes with some of the expertise we have. I mean, I think Tim was invited to speak at one of those trainings last week. Margie goes all over the country and does presentations on her work in MTSS, so we're very fortunate in that vein. So with the high school implementation, I mean, kind of an obvious statement, it is going to be very different from what you've seen in elementary or middle school. There's going to be a lot of those same foundational pieces that you're going to see at, no matter the level you're at, in terms of making sure you're making data-informed decisions, looking at your pyramid of interventions and the things you have to offer as a school, but taking your own school's culture and climate and the developmental level of students that you have and really adjusting some of those foundational pieces that are going to fit your school has been an essential piece. At the high school, I think we're fortunate where we have strong student voice in the things that are happening. They have a say in what's going on. So going off of what Sam was talking about with the Crimson culture, that was actually student developed 3 or 4 years ago from a group of kids who came up with the term Crimson culture and said, these are the things that we think all of our students should exhibit by the time they're done, and making sure that they're getting feedback on this along the way. So this is just a look at some of our data, and there's a whole load of data that we have available to us, but this right here is just what would be our office discipline referrals. So students who had some sort of behavior infraction that a staff member made the determination needed some sort of administrative intervention. So what we're trying to look at here is going back to that triangle of that 80, 7 to 15, 3 to 5, and gives you an idea of what our data has looked like over the last 3 years at Concord High School when it comes to office discipline referrals. So one key understanding about this slide is that this is excluding any attendance-related discipline. So cut classes or truancy, tardies to class without a pass or what have you. So as you can see over the years, our tier 1 is continuing to go up, which is a good thing. And we've put a lot of not only this team, but I think just the structure of our school in sometimes you can get bogged down by some of the behaviors and just trying to make sure you are managing what's happening with your students in tier 2 and tier 3. But really the key understanding is that you need to bulk up your tier 1. You need to put a lot of your stock into your tier 1 and what's happening for all students. And if we're able to do that successfully, we're going to be able to limit those other 2 tiers. So this is encouraging data for us. And then the next slide I think is even more encouraging. Where this one does include attendance. So if you look at 2019 to 2020, we had a very inflated tier 2 and tier 3 level, and our tier 1 was pretty substantially below what the national data suggests where we should be. And we made some small gains over the next year, and then this year we're at 88% of our students, so 1,300, 1,400 students have received absolutely no discipline referrals in their classroom, whether it be attendance or anything else. And I think another impressive stat is when you look at the red box all the way to the right on the slide, you look at the students, the percentage of who had 6+ behavior referrals. So 9.42 and almost 11% of our students getting some sort of office discipline referral 6 times or greater. And then you look at what that number is this year, and we're below 1%. So it's been a really encouraging piece of the work that we've been doing. This is just a slide that can demonstrate what our Tier 2 and Tier 3 referral process looks like. And Margie, feel free to jump in if I leave anything out. So the way that we've structured this is, so we have our students at our Tier 1 level with getting the interventions and supports that every single student at Concord High is available to them. And then you have students who may not be responding to those and need those little extras. So then how do we get those students to those right interventions and supports? And so as Margie alluded to earlier, 7 or 8 years ago, we had, so many teams and committees working that, me as an administrator, there were teams I didn't even know existed, but there were groups that were working. And not to say that they weren't doing good work, it was just lots of folks working in silos. So what MTSS has allowed us to do is to much better streamline that work. And so now when we have a student who has not responded to some of our Tier 1 supports, they get referred to what's called our CIRT team. It stands for Student Intervention Response Team. And what that is you can think of that as almost like the gatekeeper of where the referrals are going to go to after there's been a determined need for a student. So that team's comprised of some administrators, some school counselors, some social workers, some mental health workers. So we'll get a referral from our common staff or from a staff member, and it's a pretty comprehensive referral document. We want to know what's been going on with the student, what's already been tried, what is going well for this student, and then we'll look at all that information and data and make a determination of, okay, there seems to be an issue with class attendance. We need to make sure the student is starting their day with a positive check-in with an adult. So an appropriate intervention might be our check-in, check-out process. And so when you look at the numbers, that's the amount of referrals that we've served for students over the last 3 years. You get ahead of me there, Tim? Tier 3 is sometimes its own kind of grouping, just in the case where, as we were saying earlier, Tier 3 is where you have those students who need those highly individualized supports, some of our highest need students. So there are times where we'll have a student who we will put into a Tier 2 intervention. We're still not seeing response. We might get more understanding of things going on either in school or outside of school with the student's life, and make a determination that this is a student who fits into more of a Tier 3 level. So we do have we have the CIRT team that takes all the referrals. We have a Tier 2 team that just works and looks at our structure and our fidelity for our Tier 2 supports. And we also have a Tier 3 team that meets every other week. And we also meet with Jeremy Brooks, who's our school clinical psychologist. Thank you. School contracted clinical psychologist, who also has a pretty good relationship with a lot of these students already, and will help us make those determinations of what else the student could benefit from.
Is it ever concerning if you aren't getting a lot of CERT referrals? Just make sure people are engaged in the process and actually.
So if we go back, if I can just go back to the
sorry.
slide. No. Yeah. So what you see here is for 21-22, we had 79 referrals.
Yep.
Last year, we peaked.
Yeah.
What you're seeing right now, the 23-24 is up to this point. I can already tell you that since we've put the slides together in March, beginning of March, we can add probably another 18 to that.
Okay.
So really what happens is, and sort of the CERT referrals come in waves, if you will, simply because we are able to identify students early on, whether it's through transition from grade to grade or coming up from Runlet, that we already know will benefit from some additional supports, and we start that right away. The other piece is really depends on what kinds of interventions we are able to provide. So when we're looking at capacity of interventionists and what we have available, you will see peaks, if you will, when Amy Tucker, who is our SAP counselor, will run groups. She runs groups and she meets with students individually. When we find a need, we literally solicit from the Commons level saying, who are your students who might benefit from X group? Right. And so those conversations really are happening universally at the Commons level to identify students. One of the pieces that I also want to mention is that when a student is referred for CERT consideration, it is we make sure that the school counselor or at the Commons level, the family at that point is engaged. We do not refer a student for additional services without parents knowing, right? Because obviously we're identifying something at risk, some additional need, and so engaging family in that process is very important to us. And really that gives us consent to work with the student, right? And then also to keep them informed of what's available. The other piece is, I will give an example. We just started having, through the grant that the district received, a liaison from Riverbend in our building on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So I will again share, over the past 2 weeks, we've made 18 referrals for individual counseling at Tier 2 for students who have not been able to get that in the community prior. So those numbers, right, like you sort of look at them and you're like, oh, what happened in 23, 24? Well, we're halfway through the year, but also that's the other piece, depending on availability and then really depending on the sort of life of the building. When scheduling's happening, there's not, like February, our numbers tend to go down just because there's no capacity, bless you, to, at the commons level, to really dive into and sort of identify the students. The other piece that I want to mention is for Tier 3, we did not have a team in 21-22. And if you remember the graph, really that Tier 3 was born out of, whoa, we have, our triangle is upside down. Yeah. So we put in pieces in place to make sure that we were addressing those higher needs. Yeah. So.
And I think just an important piece about the tiers too is, you know, if you're a student who then needs to receive some sort of Tier 2 or Tier 3 intervention, it's a very fluid like movement between the tiers. It's not that you go into Tier 2 and it's like, okay, you're a Tier 2 student for the next 3 or 4 years. The actual goal is that through the intervention that we can then, if you're showing progress and being successful, that we can actually like transition you into like less and less and less where you can go back and be accessing the Tier 1 supports and finding success within the building.
I would imagine too that one student could sort of oscillate between Tier 2 and Tier 3 depending on the teacher, the class, the environment, you know, time of day, holiday season. Like
right, and what's going on in general in their life. No, absolutely, absolutely. The other piece to identify really here is that we don't think of students as like you are a tier 3 student, right? It's like you have Tier 3 needs in this area because we have many students who are doing just fine academically, but we are noticing some disengagement. And so therefore we need to push in to make sure, because if you think of that previous slide where we talked about the contextual fit for high school, really student engagement is key. So even if you're doing well academically, if you're not involved in anything else, we know that that presents a potential risk. So therefore, we need to engage students in different ways. This is just a quick slide on how complex the system gets. I know it's very small. Really, as we mentioned before, universally, we're starting at the universal level at the Commons to identify students that are doing well, but also students who might need some additional support. If that is identified as a need, we have the cert referral process. We have measurable criteria, if you will, that sort of identify students for Tier 2 supports. And those include nurse visits. They're not medically necessary, right? So if students are avoiding, sometimes they really love to connect with the nurses and spend some quality time there, which we love our nurses, but they don't really have the time to be addressing all those needs. Office discipline referrals, academic failures, out of school circumstances that we become aware of that might be getting in the way of the student participating in school are also identified. Once that is activated, as Tim mentioned, we go through the referral process, and then we identify what interventions the student which interventions the student is able to sort of go into as quickly as possible. So sometimes what happens is we might try not the best fit intervention, but that's what we have available, because let's say a group is not starting for another 4 weeks, but we don't want to wait for 4 weeks to have the student just wait. So we might start with check-in, check-out, or more individualized check-ins to build that rapport to then move into the grouped intervention. And then at Tier 2, we monitor the system, as Jim had mentioned, to really identify, are we delivering their intervention? Because sometimes what also happens is young people are very wonderful and say, yes, I will join the group, and then they show up to 2 out of 8 groups. Yeah. Well, that's not really fidelity of implementation. So then when we're looking at, well, this hasn't worked, is it the intervention or was it non-attendance in the group? And so we need to circle back and sort of figure out how to. Right. So we have to sort of tease that out. So we have a pretty complex process. This is more of the eligibility, and that's that.
Do you guys feel that you have enough support to be able to maintain this level of support for students? I can see where it could get overwhelming if your numbers were.
I think, so I'll answer for myself. I think what we have been really good at the high school is identifying needs and really working hard to maximize what we have. And I'll give you an example of that. We used to have an academic seminar, which was a tier 2 intervention. And it was really a class that students were scheduled for to help with executive functioning in connection with an adult. And that position basically got dissolved, right? There were other needs. But what we have done is really recognize that our academic center, who is now universally available, is actually reaching a broader group of students and providing that intervention. Could we really use academic seminar? Probably, right? But we sort of have to look at how can we maximize it, what we have to continue with the capacity. That's all I'm going to say.
I was just going to, you pretty much said what I was going to say. I was just going to add, like, the changes, as the student body changes and we get, incoming freshmen and they age on to seniors, the needs change. And I think what Margie just hit the point on was that we evaluate our resources and sometimes we repurpose in order to make it work. But going back to that original slide with the umbrella, it is an entire 360-degree look at a student, whether it's substance use, whether it's mental health, whether it's social emotional well-being, whether it's academics, constantly looking at that. Could we always use more support? Absolutely. If we had a resource, we're going to maximize it without a doubt. But I just think right now we continue to evaluate what the needs are and we adjust and reshuffle the resources to make sure we're doing that.
And that fluidity and flexibility is so important. But this, for me at least, feels like the right path. And through the work I've done with you this year, I really would encourage everyone on the board, to take a good look at this package. I'm going to send that out in a note and include this in there. But we need you to tell us what we don't know, too. So keep that in mind as you go forward. Thanks. Barb?
So I give scholarships every year to graduating seniors through the Mulliby Foundation, which means I read hundreds of pages of scholarship applications. I don't know if any of you read these applications, but one of the main questions, and it's a deciding factor for me and who am I award a scholarship, is challenges you've had and how the things that you could do at Concord High helped you. And I get teary-eyed. When I finish reading these, 80 or 90 scholarship applications, so that's a lot of human beings right there. The overwhelming response to the support they receive at school is heartwarming. And it's all, listening to this, I'm like, oh, that's what they meant, that's what they meant, that's what they meant. So, and these are students, some of going to four-year colleges, excellent athletes, students on the outside that look just fine, that completely are not just fine. And what I get, I just finished, which is why it's all fresh in my head, but this year especially, I don't know if it's just more integrated or more efficient or what, but the 80 or so scholarship applications I read, every single one of those students talked about somebody at Concord High School that saw them and helped them or got them connected or a group that they were in or something. So I share that with you just to say, no matter how hard it is, 80 students saying their needs were met at Concord High School, that's pretty astounding information. And it gets me.
Mr. Fabrizio?
Thank you very much. I think that they said it often that as a high school, this is rare. It's rare to have a high school that's this organized, this together on something like this. And they talked about the fidelity piece. And the nice thing from my seat, I sit in the chair of overseeing student services. And every day, each and every day, I'm talking to someone about a student in a need and a building need and something like that. The high school does a great job, and you ask what their needs are. They do a great job articulating their needs. We talk often about that and kind of what do you have, what more it is. And the other part that the high school is leading at is when I talk to Michelle Speckman, 6 times a day and twice a night, and that's part of her role and my role together, and we're connected. And when it comes to me where I'm struggling here with the student or this is happening, I have a lot of confidence in this process has been followed, and that's huge because it gives me direction on trying to help them find the right and appropriate resource either within the district or expanding our resources outside the district. I have a good idea there's been a huge process to this that's happened, and it's done with fidelity,
Yep.
and a lot of things are in place. So I thank them for that.
Absolutely. It's just great.
One of the biggest concerns in years past from 8th graders coming to 9th grade is that they're gonna disappear, like this, there, all these things going on and this and that, and I feel like every year it appears to get better and better, that the system just becomes more efficient in keeping everyone in knee-deep water as opposed to neck-deep water. So.
And another thing that we added this year, we're evolving, and we're evolving as a district in a lot of these things. In Fern Seiden as Director of Student Staff Wellness, and then last year with Janine Richards, we started a district-wide BIT team, which is a behavior intervention team, but we call it Concord Cares. It's the name of it. And it's an opportunity to come together as both an elementary team and a secondary team. And we talk about those kids that rise above this tier 3 level or are within these tiers, and we're having some really concerns about where they are and what their needs are. And it's a district-wide team of a bunch of professionals and outside community resources that comes together to talk about that. And many of these members sit on that team and can talk about really about kids and what their needs are. And this is starting now from preschool through 12. So we're looking at students that may have needs that need nice transitions to go forward and have a good tracking system for that to happen now. That's new to us, and we're learning it each time we meet. And Jim is our kind of chair of the secondary part, along with Sean White. And they're doing
That's
a good
great.
job.
I would encourage you all to have somebody that, once you've got this down and all set to go, that sort of introduces it to the middle school, and maybe they can start there, and then once we've got the middle school, bring it down to the elementaries, and then hopefully by the time they get to you, we'll all have just tier 1. So.
Yeah, there's been some great collaboration this year in alignment with the middle school and the high school, and Jay is having these conversations with myself and Kathleen. Yeah, you're going to see this, some of it trickle down, and over time, as they get efficient at it, we're going to see it bubble up to us. So it's just going to be a beneficial thing.
It's wonderful to hear. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there anything else that we need to discuss this evening? Not seeing anything. Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
Can I just, before
yes,
that,
I'm
just
sorry.
just a quick update, and I'm sorry Kim, it wasn't on the agenda, but I know it's timely because who knows what will happen in May or later in the year. Extended school year in Title I summer programs
Yes.
And entering K programs. I just want to give people kind of, they're listening. The dates will run July 1st through July 25th. We won't meet on July 4th, so it's one day off there.
Is that longer than usual?
No, it's 4 weeks,
4 weeks? Okay.
4 hours a day. All right.
Bye.
So it's it's kind of that 4x4 model again, and and it's going to be at we have construction going on at both Broken Ground and Beaver Meadow this summer, so we have to combine some programs. So there'll be CMS and Beaver Meadow will both be at CMS. Abbott Downing will have their own separate program, and then Millbrook and Broken Ground will be at Millbrook. And then the middle school program, of course, and then the high school runs various programs themselves. But
Beaver Meadow will be at CMS?
yeah, for the entire summer, for both Title I and for extended school year for special ed. That's going to happen, and we're in the planning stages now, and things are going well. Entering K, I know there's been some questions about parity, so we've done some nice work with the principals together, and it'll run the last 2 weeks of our summer program. It'll run Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Both last week, so 6 days of entering K, which is consistent across the district. We have a consistent assessment now that we're selecting kids with, so that's much kind of tighter than we've been in the past. And it looks like plans are happening, and we're collecting lists now of students, and invitations have gone out, so we're in good shape and we're rolling along. Just to give you an update, and I'll update again in May where we are and where we settled with all that, and how many programs and numbers of kids and all that thing, but I don't have that yet because we're just building. Right now, off this data you saw today, this is a big builder of of how we build the summer programs based on need. So thank you.
This is why instructional is the best committee, because it's.
I'm going to say this on TV. For a board that had no trouble cutting a bunch of teachers, I can see why they think that way, because they're not here
Right.
listening to this. So I'm a little irritated at board members, hello, wherever you are at home, not here. It hurts me, because,
This is good stuff.
yes, exactly.
And there are some really great
Well,
things happening in our
and
school district.
the test results, so okay, it's working. Why would we want to take teachers away from those grades? So that's me being pissy because I can. But yeah, where are our board members? Anyway, that's me.
Well, I thank you for that. Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Would you like to second it?
All right. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, adjourn. Thank you
gonna-
all for coming and tuning in.
I was going to save it